This story still affects the way I sleep during winter. I live in a small house at the very edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood in the Midwest. The street itself looks ordinary. Mailboxes evenly spaced, short driveways, porch lights that turn on automatically when the sun goes down. People wave at each other. Kids ride bikes in the summer. Nothing about it feels dangerous. But behind my house, everything changes. My backyard doesn't end with another fence or another family's property. It ends abruptly at the forest, a wide stretch of dense trees that runs for miles, uninterrupted and unlit. In the warmer months, it feels distant, quiet, almost peaceful. In winter, it feels like something else entirely. Once the snow starts falling, the forest seems to swallow sound. During the day, it looks harmless enough. Bare branches, frozen ground, animal tracks cutting across the white. At night, it becomes endless. Darker than it should be. Silent in a way that feels heavy, like the air itself is pressing down. I've lived here long enough to know the woods. I know the difference between wind brushing through bare branches and something heavier moving with intention. I know the sharp crack of ice splitting under pressure, the soft collapse of snow falling from a tree. Most nights, those sounds fade into the background. That night, nothing faded. It was late January, one of those nights where the cold feels sharper after sunset. Earlier in the evening, a heavy snowfall had rolled through and buried everything beneath a thick, clean layer of white. Tire tracks disappeared. Old footprints vanished. Even the faint trail that leads from my yard into the woods was completely erased. By the time I let my dog Atlas outside, the world felt sealed off. Atlas is a large dog, part German Shepherd, part Husky. He's strong, alert, and usually fearless to the point of being reckless. Fireworks don't bother him. Thunder barely gets a reaction. If something strange shows up in the yard, his instinct is curiosity, not caution. That night, the moment his paws touched the snow, he stopped. He didn't run ahead. He didn't sniff the ground. He didn't even take a second step. He just froze. Body stiff, tail low, ears angled forward, staring toward the far end of the yard. At first, I assumed he was watching a deer. We get them all the time. I stepped onto the porch, the cold immediately biting into my face, and followed his gaze. That's when I saw the footprints. They started at the tree line, one single set of boot prints, deep and heavy, cutting straight through the snow. Each step was evenly spaced, deliberate, as if whoever made them wasn't rushing. The size alone told me they weren't mine. The stride told me they belonged to someone taller, heavier. They didn't wander. They didn't circle the yard. They didn't approach the windows. They stopped less than 6 feet from my back door. There were no footprints leading away. I remember standing there far longer than I should have, staring at them, trying to force logic into the situation. Maybe the person had stepped backward in their own tracks. Maybe the angle made it look worse than it was. Maybe I was tired and overreacting, but the snow was perfect, smooth, undisturbed. Atlas let out a low growl I had never heard from him before. Not a bark, not excitement. Something deeper, something uneasy. I followed his gaze toward the woods, but the porch light barely reached the first row of trees. Everything beyond that was layered darkness. The forest felt closer than usual, like the trees were packed tighter together, hiding whatever was between them. I called Atlas back inside and locked the door behind us. Then I checked the locks again and again. I turned on every exterior light and sat on the couch pretending to watch television, though I couldn't tell you a single thing that played. I barely slept. The next morning, I went outside as soon as the sun came up. The snow was still there, perfect, clean, untouched, no footprints, no disturbances, no sign anyone had ever been there. I walked the length of the yard slowly, checking every angle, every patch of snow. Nothing. It was as if the night before had never happened. I told myself the wind must have filled them in overnight. I needed a reasonable explanation, so I accepted it, even though the branches were still heavy with snow and the air had been completely still. Over the next few days, Atlas changed. He stopped going near the woods, even during the day. When I let him out at night, he stayed close to the house, pacing instead of exploring. Sometimes he would stop and stare toward the trees, ears twitching, as if listening for something I couldn't hear. At night, he began waking up suddenly. He'd lift his head, stare toward the back door, then slowly stand and pace the hallway. That's when the motion sensor light started turning on. The first night I barely noticed it. I assumed it was wildlife. The second night, I checked the time, 2:14 a.m. The light stayed on for about a minute, then shut off. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same duration. After a few nights, I noticed something else. Atlas would wake up seconds before the light came on. His body would tense, his ears would lift, and he'd stare toward the back of the house as if he already knew what was about to happen. I tried to ignore it. I told myself sensors malfunction, electronics fail, animals move in patterns. Then one night, I forced myself to look. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see the edge of the yard. When the light snapped on, it illuminated the snow near the tree line. A man was standing there, tall, thin, dressed in dark winter clothing that blended into the shadows. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't crouching. He was standing perfectly still, facing the house. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was looking directly at me. He didn't flinch, didn't shield his eyes, didn't react to the sudden light at all. It felt like I had interrupted something he had been doing for a long time. I watched him for what felt like minutes, though it couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. My body felt heavy, like moving would somehow make things worse. Then the light shut off. In the brief darkness, I saw him step backward into the forest, slowly, deliberately. Never turning around, just fading into the trees like he had always belonged there. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I called the police. They searched the woods behind my house and found nothing. No footprints, no camps, no shelters, no explanation. They suggested it was probably someone cutting through the forest at night. After their visit, the motion sensor light never turned on again. But Atlas still wakes up every night around 2:14. Sometimes he growls at the back door. Sometimes he whines softly, like he's trying to warn me about something he doesn't understand. And every winter, when the snow falls clean and untouched, I find myself staring at the tree line, wondering how many nights someone stood just outside my house, watching before I ever noticed. Winter changes the way a house behaves. I didn't realize that until I started living alone, in a place where the backyard opens directly into forest. In warmer months, the house feels predictable, familiar. But once the snow starts piling up and the nights stretch longer than the days, everything inside feels louder. Every creak carries farther. Every shift of air feels intentional. At first, I told myself that was all it was. Just winter. The first thing I noticed was the chair. I came downstairs one morning and saw that one of the dining chairs was pulled halfway out from the table, not knocked over, not angled strangely, just moved. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at it, trying to remember if I had left it that way the night before. I hadn't. I remember pushing all the chairs in because Atlas kept bumping into them while pacing the kitchen. I even remember being mildly annoyed about it. That memory was clear. Still, I told myself it meant nothing. A few days later, it was the hallway closet door. That door almost never gets opened. It holds winter coats, boots, cleaning supplies, things I rarely need. I walked past it on my way to the kitchen and noticed it was open just a few inches. I closed it without thinking. The next morning, it was open again. That's when I started paying attention. I began noticing small things that didn't quite sit right. A mug I always left by the sink was suddenly on the counter by the window. The bathroom light was on when I was sure I'd turned it off. The TV remote was on the couch instead of the side table. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed danger. Just enough to make me uneasy. Atlas noticed before I did. He stopped relaxing in the house. He'd lie down, then suddenly lift his head and stare at corners of rooms, doorways, the base of the stairs. Sometimes he'd sniff the air slowly, like he was trying to place a smell that didn't belong. At night, he refused to settle. He paced the hallway endlessly, nails clicking softly against the floor. He'd stop outside my bedroom door, stand there motionless for several seconds, then move on. The first night I heard a noise, I almost ignored it. I was on the couch, half asleep, when I heard a faint sound from upstairs. A soft thud. Not loud enough to alarm me, but distinct enough to register. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it sounded like a slow step. Then another. I sat up, heart pounding, and watched the staircase. Atlas stood beside me, body rigid, ears pinned forward. The sound stopped. I didn't go upstairs that night. The next morning, the house looked exactly the same. Nothing out of place, nothing broken, nothing missing. But in the bathroom, the mirror had a faint streak across it. A handprint. Not a full one, just fingers lightly dragged across the glass. I wiped it away immediately, my hands shaking, and tried to convince myself it was mine from the night before. I didn't believe that, but I needed something to hold on to. The following week, the noises became more frequent. Soft footsteps when I was downstairs, a floorboard creaking when I was brushing my teeth, the faint sound of something shifting weight above me late at night. Atlas reacted every time. Sometimes he'd growl quietly, sometimes he'd whine, sometimes he'd just stare, unmoving like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. Then the keys moved. I always leave my keys on a hook by the back door, always. One night I placed them there out of habit. The next morning they were sitting neatly on the kitchen counter. Not dropped. Placed. That was the first time I genuinely considered the possibility that someone else was inside my house. I checked every door, every window, everything was locked. That afternoon, snow fell again. By evening, the ground outside was covered in a fresh, untouched layer of white. I let Atlas out before bed, and he immediately stopped at the door. Wouldn't go out. I stepped outside with him, and that's when I saw the footprints. They were close to the house. Large boot prints circling the perimeter, pressed deep into the snow. They didn't approach any doors. They didn't stop at windows. They just went around the house. Slowly. Methodically. I pulled Atlas inside and locked everything. That night, I slept in my clothes. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps again. This time, they were downstairs. Slow, careful. Like someone trying not to make noise. Atlas jumped off the bed and stood between me and the door, teeth bared, ears flat. I grabbed my phone and sat frozen, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom. I swear I could hear breathing. Then silence. The next morning, nothing looked disturbed. Nothing was missing. Except the back door. The deadbolt was unlocked. I know I locked it. I remember checking it twice. I called the police that day. They searched the house, checked the woods, and found nothing. No forced entry, no evidence of anyone inside. They suggested stress, sleepwalking, forgetfulness. That night, Atlas slept in my room. Around 2 in the morning, he woke up growling. I followed his gaze. The bedroom door was open. I had closed it. I moved out a month later. To this day, I don't know if someone was coming into my house, or if they never really left. When you live near a forest long enough, you stop reacting to most sounds. Branches scrape against the siding when the wind shifts. Snow slides off the roof late at night. Animals move just beyond the reach of the porch light, sometimes close enough that you can hear them breathing in the cold air. At first, those noises keep you awake. Eventually, they become background noise. What never becomes normal is movement that sounds deliberate. The winter I noticed it, the cold settled in early and refused to leave. Snow piled up faster than usual, and the forest behind my house felt closer, heavier, like it was pressing inward. The trees stood still in a way that made the nights feel crowded, even when I was completely alone. I lived by myself then, aside from Atlas. Atlas wasn't an anxious dog. He didn't bark at shadows or passing cars. He slept deeply, moved with confidence, and only reacted when something genuinely caught his attention. That's why the first night he stared at the ceiling unsettled me so much. It was after midnight. The house was silent in that deep, padded way only snow can create. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when Atlas slowly lifted his head and locked his eyes on the ceiling above us. He didn't growl, he didn't move, he just watched. I muted my phone and listened. Nothing. I whispered his name, expecting him to snap out of it. He didn't look at me. His body stayed tense, muscles tight, ears tilted backward as if he was listening to something I couldn't hear. That should have been enough to make me get up, but I didn't. Over the next few nights, the sounds became easier to notice. A faint pressure above the bedroom, a slow shift, like weight being carefully redistributed. It never sounded like an animal scrambling or running. It always sounded controlled, intentional. Always late, always brief, always stopping the moment I focused on it. I blamed the house. Cold weather makes homes settle. Wood contracts, nails shift. I repeated those explanations until the sounds began to travel. One night, lying completely still, I followed it with my eyes as the movement passed from above my bedroom into the hallway, then toward the living room. Atlas followed it too. His head moved slowly, tracking something I couldn't see, his breathing shallow and controlled. He never broke eye contact with the ceiling. The attic access panel was in the hallway ceiling, a small square with a pull cord hanging down. I hadn't opened it since moving in. I rarely even thought about it. Until one morning when I noticed the cord was hanging lower than usual. I stood beneath it longer than I should have, trying to convince myself I'd simply never paid attention before. Still, I pushed it back up until it rested flush against the panel. That afternoon, Atlas refused to walk through the hallway. When I tried to guide him forward, he leaned backward, nails scraping slightly against the floor. His eyes stayed fixed upward, his body rigid. Later that day, something else felt off. The kitchen drawer where I kept utensils was open slightly. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to notice if you were already uneasy. I closed it and told myself I must have forgotten. The next morning, a cabinet door was open. The following day, the bathroom light was on when I was certain I'd turned it off. Each time, I found a way to explain it. That night, I woke to movement again. Heavier this time, slower. Above the hallway. Above the living room. At one point, something dropped lightly onto the ceiling drywall. Not a crash. Not an accident. More like something being placed or tested. I sat upright in bed, heart racing, as Atlas let out a low growl I'd never heard from him before. The next morning, a chair in the living room had shifted closer to the hallway, not knocked over, not dragged loudly, just moved enough to make me stop and stare at it. I told myself I must have moved it. But the feeling didn't go away. The attic inspection came after that. I needed proof, something concrete. I pulled the panel down and shined a flashlight inside. No animals, no nests, no droppings, no disturbed insulation. The attic was clean. Unnaturally clean. That night, I placed a chair directly beneath the attic panel. If something moved, I wanted to know. At 1:38 a.m., Atlas erupted into barking. Not toward the door, not toward the windows. Straight up. A long, dragging sound echoed above the ceiling, slow and deliberate. Dust fell through the seams, catching the dim hallway nightlight as it drifted down. The chair beneath the panel creaked. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. In the morning, the chair had moved slightly. That evening, fresh snow fell, erasing every trace of the day before. Before going to bed, I stepped outside with a flashlight. Boot prints led from the forest to the side of my house. They stopped directly beneath the attic. There were no prints leading away. That night, Atlas positioned himself between me and the hallway and refused to lie down. Just before dawn, I heard a soft tap directly above the attic panel. Not a knock. Not a bang. A tap. Like someone checking it. I moved out less than a week later. The new owners never reported anything unusual. But sometimes, even now, I wake up convinced I can hear something pacing above me. Slow, careful, patient. Waiting. After everything that had already happened, installing cameras felt like the only way to regain some sense of control. Not because I felt brave, because I was exhausted. Exhausted from guessing, from replaying sounds in my head, from standing still in dark rooms, trying to decide whether what I heard was real or just my nerves filling in the silence. Cameras felt objective. They didn't get scared. They didn't imagine things. Winter makes paranoia easy. The nights were long and heavy, and the forest still pressed against the back of the property like a wall. Snow piled up against the fence, muffling sound and swallowing distance. Atlas kept reacting to things I couldn't see or hear, stopping mid-step, staring toward corners of the house as if something had just passed through. The cameras were supposed to end that. I installed 4 of them myself, one facing the driveway, one covering the backyard, one mounted along the side of the house near the attic wall, and one inside, aimed down the main hallway. I measured angles carefully, walked through their fields of view, opened doors, stood in corners, tested motion detection. When I finished, I felt something close to relief. At least now, if something happened, I would know. The first few nights were quiet. Too quiet. I checked the footage constantly, too often. Hours of nothing. Snow drifting down, trees swaying slightly, Atlas pacing occasionally before settling back down. No alerts. No movement. I started to feel foolish for how tense I'd been. Then the first notification came, just after midnight. Motion detected, backyard camera. I opened the app immediately. Nothing, no movement, no animal, no shadow, just the familiar outline of trees and the faint reflection of snow passing in front of the lens. I rewound the footage frame by frame, still nothing. I told myself it was a glitch. The next night it happened again. Same time. Same camera. Atlas reacted before the alert finished vibrating in my hand. He jumped up and ran toward the back door, barking sharply, his fur standing on end. I stood behind him, phone in hand, staring at the live feed. Nothing had changed. That's when I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The timestamp skipped. Only a few seconds. Barely noticeable. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Over the next several nights, a pattern formed. The alerts always came between 12:30 and 1 a.m., always from the backyard camera or the side camera near the attic. Never from the driveway, never from the hallway. Atlas began sleeping lighter. He would wake suddenly, ears twitching, scanning the ceiling or the back wall. I started sleeping with my phone in my hand, the camera app already open. One night, I decided to stay awake. I turned off all the lights and sat on the couch with Atlas beside me, watching the live feeds in real time. The house felt unnaturally still, like even the forest had decided to stop moving. At 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Side camera. The feed froze. Then the screen went black, only for a second. When the image returned, everything looked normal again. Snow falling, no movement, but Atlas was growling, low, continuous, focused on the hallway. I switched to the hallway camera. It was still live, but the angle was wrong, just slightly, as if someone had nudged it upward. I checked the physical camera the next morning. It was still tightly mounted. No loose screws, no signs of tampering. But fresh snow covered the ground. Along the side of the house, I saw footprints, boot prints. They followed the wall closely and stopped exactly where the side camera couldn't see. A narrow strip between the edge of the frame and the corner of the house. A blind spot. I adjusted the camera immediately, angling it lower and wider. I even marked the snow with my own boots to confirm the coverage. That night, the alert came again. Backyard. This time, the footage showed something, only for a moment. A tall shape crossing the far edge of the frame, partially obscured by falling snow. It moved slowly, deliberately, too tall to be an animal. Gone before I could pause it. Atlas barked violently, racing from window to window. I checked every lock, every feed, every corner of the house. Then the backyard camera went offline. No signal, no reconnect. The next morning, I unplugged it completely. That afternoon, I installed an additional camera, I covered the blind spot, or at least I thought I did. The following night, there were no alerts, no glitches, no skipped timestamps, nothing. It felt wrong. Around 1:10 a.m., Atlas woke me by pressing against my chest, trembling. He wasn't barking, he wasn't growling, he was listening. Then my phone vibrated. Camera offline, hallway. I sat up, staring at the bedroom door. The hallway feed was gone. I checked the others. Driveway, live. Backyard, unplugged. Side camera, offline. I didn't move. I listened. Footsteps. Inside the house, slow, measured, like someone who already knew exactly where the cameras were. Atlas positioned himself between me and the door, teeth bared, body shaking but silent. I opened the app again. One notification remained. Motion detected. Backyard. Timestamped 5 minutes earlier. I opened the clip. It was corrupted. The final frame froze on the back door. From the outside, the handle was turned. The police came later that night, but there was nothing to find. No forced entry, no broken locks. The cameras were still mounted exactly where I'd left them. But the footage from that night was gone. Every clip between 12:30 and 1:15 a.m. deleted. I moved out shortly after. Before leaving for good, I checked the system one last time. There was a clip I hadn't seen before. No alert, no timestamp, just a few seconds long. It showed the side of the house, the blind spot, and a shadow standing just outside the frame, not moving, waiting.
Some stories don't end when the danger's gone. They end when you realize how close it really was. A sound you ignored, a moment you explained away, a feeling you told yourself was nothing. Most people don't survive horror because they fight. They survive because something or someone leaves first. And sometimes the scariest part isn't what happened, it's what never got explained. If these stories stayed with you, if any moment felt a little too familiar, you're not alone. There are more stories like this. Stories that don't scream. Stories that wait. You can find them right here. Because some stories don't feel like fiction. They feel too real.